Hello, welcome everybody.
Hey, mate.
All right, people are starting to pile in here, which is great. Um, just want to welcome everybody to this webinar. My name is Brandon. I work at Tithely here. Been at Tithely about 5 years. So if I've had the pleasure of talking to you before, it's great to see you again. Love to be able to work with our customers and love to be able to do things like this. This is the Stewarding the Next Generation webinar with our friends at NCF. I just want to make a couple housekeeping announcements before we get started, before I pass it over to our CEO, Dean. As you're piling in, feel free to put in the chat where you're from, what church you're with, those kinds of things, maybe how long you've been using Tithely. And also, don't forget the Q&A function. That's always just the common question about webinars is like, how do I ask questions? There's a little Q&A function down there at the bottom of your toolbar. Feel free to click that and ask questions during the webinar. At the end, there will be some Q&A time where Dean and our friends from NCF can answer some questions about what they're presenting. But Dean, I want to kick it over to you and just
Yep.
let us know what we're doing here today and what our attendees can expect.
Yeah, absolutely. Welcome, everybody. Dean Sweetman, great to have you here. This is going to be a phenomenal webinar in the sense that there is a massive shift going on in society. And as we all know, and I am one, the baby boomers are aging out. I'm in the kind of front end of the baby boom. I was born in 1964, which was technically the last year of baby boomers. So hopefully I've got a long way to go. But I think it's about 10,000 baby boomers are retiring per day, which means there is a massive transfer of wealth coming from the boomers down, trickle down, all to the next generations. And what we want to focus on today is, what does that mean for the church? And we all know we start from a premise of when you teach what the scriptures say about money and generosity, people want to give, they want to be generous. Our business is helping people facilitate that generosity. It's what we do at Tithely. And NCF does the same thing. And so they're going to talk a little bit about that. And they've done a ton of research on this. It's going to be very helpful. And so stay open-minded and get ready to be challenged a little bit. But I think our goal together with our friends at NCF is for you to walk away today and have a real kind of sense of, okay, what's coming next? What do I need to do to position my church to be able to be a beneficiary from the people who are in my church that want to be generous and want to expand the kingdom through what you're doing? And so I want to welcome our friends, Lucas and Kristen. Hi, guys. How you
Hey
doing?
there. Good.
Good to see you.
Awesome. Well, we're going to jump right in if that works for everybody.
Let's do it.
Let me share my screen. And Dean, give me a thumbs up that you can see it.
All good.
Good. Awesome. Okay. Well, let me introduce myself and then I'll hand it over to Lucas, who's going to come off mute and introduce himself as well. I have been at the National Christian Foundation for about 7 years now, and I serve on the brand and customer experience team, which basically means that I help with any sort of experience design related to the National Christian Foundation, but really any research that we do. And that's why we're here today and what we're going to share with you. I'm super excited to be here. And the perspective that I'll be bringing is the data itself. There was a lot of data. And when we met with the team at Tithely, we pulled together what we felt would be most applicable or helpful to this crowd. So you're going to get a splattering of different insights and data pieces that we thought were most interesting. And then Lucas here, he'll introduce himself. He's going to be bringing the perspective of applying it. So Lucas, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kristen. My name is Lucas Cooper. I'm the Vice President of Network Relations, one of three with the National Christian Foundation. I was telling Brandon earlier that I'm essentially the Dwight Schrute of the National Christian Foundation. I'm the assistant to the regional manager. I've been at the National Christian Foundation for 2.5 years. Prior to that, I served in vocational ministry for 25 years. I was a campus pastor of a large church here in the Phoenix area. I pastored a church in Toronto, Canada for 8 years. And then I currently serve as the stewardship and generosity pastor and on the preaching team of a church that averages about 11,000 on a normal weekend. Christianity Today just said we were the seventh fastest growing church in the country, for whatever that's worth. And so Kristen, like she said, is going to bring the data, and I'm going to be her color commentary a little bit and talk a little bit about how this data really applies within the context of shepherding people toward generosity.
Great. All right, well, let's just jump in. And I'm going to start with our starting point and setting the stage for a few minutes on why we did this research and why we think it matters. So like Dean mentioned, the Great Wealth Transfer is one of the biggest reasons why we started this research about a year ago on NextGen Christians and stewards. And as a reminder, the Great Wealth Transfer is the transmission of family assets from one generation to the next. Well, about a year ago, a little over a year ago, it was estimated that 84 trillion would pass by 2045. And I think sometime in the middle of last year, it was estimated it went up to 124 trillion. There's a lot of reasons why. We don't have time to go into that. But that's a giant number. It is a huge, huge number that's going to pass in terms of wealth. And there's a lot that's tied into that when it comes to family dynamics, as you all know, where that money is going to go. Millennials are one of the largest generation the generation that will receive the largest chunk of that wealth transfer, followed by Gen X. So that was one reason. The second reason why we conducted this research was the fact that millennial wealth has quadrupled since 2019. So, in 2019, it was roughly 4.5 trillion. And now it's at the end of last year, it was roughly 16 trillion. And so between the wealth coming to millennial inheritors and wealth that's been generated by millennials, there's just a lot of change that will take place. That's already starting to take place. And so we conducted and embarked this research to better understand what might happen in terms of that change. So a little bit about the study. What was the purpose of it? One was just to really understand what makes NextGen distinct. And we're talking about NextGen millennials primarily in the study, and I'll define that in just a minute. But we're also going to use the term current gen, and that's because we wanted to look at the relative differences between a generation of next gen versus everyone that's older, 45 and older. So you'll see that, and that's what helped us see the distinctions. But what are the pain points and needs related to stewardship? And then what are the insights that could help the generosity ecosystem, which we're a part of that ecosystem, but churches and ministry leaders like yourself are a huge piece of the generosity ecosystem. We can't do what we do without ministries and churches because we're trying to help get that money to the right places, like church leaders yourself. So who did we work with? We had a research firm, Heart and Mind Strategies, that helped us, and then also a lot of contributing partners that were a big piece of this. If you're related to one of these partners, we want to thank you for being a part of that. But we just wanted to give credit to these 9 partners that really helped us along the way. So the sample that you'll see in the data that's representative, there are about 360 NextGen Christians that are represented in the data. At the time last year, it was 28 to 44 years old. It's both NCF and non-NCF givers. So that's important to note because we wanted to make sure that we had a broad sample, and it has varying wealth capacities. So you'll see some high net worth, some non-high net worth, but we wanted to make sure we had both. And then, like I mentioned, we did have current gen givers, which is basically older than 45 years old for relative comparison. Before I get into the data, the last thing I wanted to mention are kind of the bucket of who we're talking about largely when we look at the data is practicing Christians. It's not representative of all generous or next-gen Christians. It's people that are practicing their faith. And we saw that in the data as we looked at our group of data versus the general population. So that's important to note. And they do have a desire for wise stewardship. The other thing you'll see is, as I go through the presentation, is we're going to talk about a few different terms occasionally. One is a wealth creator. So this is someone who has generated their own wealth They didn't inherit anything. On the other side, you'll see us talk about inheritors. So these are people that have been around generational wealth and are navigating that. They've been around family wealth for more than one generation. And then hybrid is an interesting segment that came out of the data where it's both. They have elements of both. They inherited wealth and they've also generated their own. So we'll be talking mostly about next-gen Christians at large, but we will break down some of these segments throughout. All right, that's a lot of me talking. Lucas, do you have any comments before I get started?
Yeah, I wanted to say that, as a 46-year-old, I fall in the current gen and not the next gen, which is a little rough. It's a little rough for me to hear. But I think it's important, it's salient, because when we use these terms, current gen, next gen, even the word wealth sometimes can have a little bit of a funky connotation within a church context. Inheritors, hybrids, wealth creators. For us, these are neutral statements of fact, right? It really is. It doesn't carry with it a negative implication or a positive implication. It's just the type of Christians that we have the opportunity to serve. So as you're listening and taking these in, again, even if you fall within the current gen like I do, that is not a negative thing. That's just a thing. It's just a category, just like wealth or hybrid or inheritor.
Great. Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to jump into, yeah.
I might just add 2 cents to that. Like there's a lot of times church leaders are somewhat, in trepidation about this kind of thing, segmenting donors, having an overall understanding of who in your church has the ability. Everyone's got different abilities, obviously, but I think this just goes to the overall is that church leaders should be informed. They should not be afraid of data, and they should be willing to dig into that data to maximize the opportunities that people can, come alongside and be involved in ministry. And I think it's up to church leaders to really embrace this whole concept, and without it getting too icky and crazy and as we know, ministry is not business, but we have to overlay business practices. And then if you run a business, you know everything there is to know about revenue. Okay, we don't speak in terms of revenue, but that's what it is. People giving is money coming in to the church bank account. And it's just a kind of a good overall thought to think, I'm going to engage in this kind of mindset rather than stick my head in the sand and hope it all just works out.
I think that's a great comment. And the last thing I would add to that is that one of the things we talk about at NCF a lot when we do research or we look at the data is there's always the humanness behind it. There's a story, there's a narrative, and it doesn't downplay that, but the data is the data. So
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. All right, so we're going to jump in with the first insight around the foundation of giving and generosity. And before I get into the differences between generations, one of the things that has really been energizing at NCF over the course of multiple studies, and we saw it show up in this study as well, is that there's a core set of beliefs that are central to all generations. So we had, in this study, it was primarily focused on millennials, but we've done multiple studies before this, and we asked the same questions, and this has been true for all of them. And that is that we see the next generation having very similar beliefs in terms of the foundation for giving as current gen. So faith being the primary guide for their decisions and their actions, that wealth is a responsibility given by God that they want to manage wisely, that it influences their charitable giving. Faith is a big time influence of their charitable giving. Now, how that gets interpreted is different among the generations. But I think this is a really important distinction that both the next generation as well as older generations are very committed people of faith. And so it plays out as a primary role in their life, but we see it show up a little bit differently. So the first big difference that we wanted to point out to this crowd is just the idea of belonging and connection. And so in our qualitative interviews, we heard a theme around belonging, and we heard a theme around, I don't feel connected to my church. And as we dug into that, there was really three levels of the church or faith that they were talking about. One, the church as a whole, so as an institution. Two was the local place of worship, where they go to worship, to listen to sermons, engage in scripture. And then it was the people, the faith community. So the people that they serve and serve with as they follow Jesus. And so those were the three layers that they were talking about. And what we found when we went to quantitative data, we asked the question on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being very disconnected and 10 being very connected. How do you rate each of these three in terms of your connection? And it was very clear that the faith community is where the connection stands the strongest for the next generation. So that number you see on the screen, 78, is representative of 8, 9, and 10. So if someone answered 8, 9, and 10, that means that they feel connected to that thing. And so 78% is where NextGen landed. The local place of worship was about 68%, still strong, but it's not the strongest in terms of as strong as the faith community. And then the church as a whole, this is really where the disconnection is happening. So the institution, so about half would say that they feel connected, where the other half feel disconnected. And this is the big insight here. So when you look at current gen, their 8, 9, and 10 on the church as a whole was roughly 70%. So much stronger connection to the institution of the church. And I think this is, when we think about culture, this is where a lot of the disconnect is happening, or in families it's happening. But what's, I think really promising and encouraging is that those first two is still very strong for NextGen. Lucas, I want to turn it over to you for a second. I know you had a comment to make here.
Yeah, this is really, really interesting and really compelling, and especially for church leaders and for those who really love the, theology and the Bible like I do. Russell James has done some research, and if you've never heard of Russell James, he is a Juris Doctorate, a PhD, and a certified financial planner. He's a professor at Texas Tech University, runs the program there, but he's also a Jesus follower. And he's written 2 books that are really compelling. The first is called The Biblical Fundraiser in Ancient Worlds, and the second is called The Biblical Fundraiser in Modern Practice. And what he does in the biblical fundraiser in ancient worlds, and this is really important, is that he essentially exegetes 1 Timothy 6, 17 through 19. And if you're not familiar, it starts this way: command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth. And he goes on from there, if you know the verse. And Dean, you mentioned it a minute ago, sometimes there's some trepidation there as pastors, right? Like,
Right.
we don't want to talk to wealthy people. We don't want to talk about wealth. We don't want to talk about riches. And
Right.
Paul is pretty good at kind of flying in the face of our trepidation, right? He
Really.
just comes right at it, and he says,
Yeah.
look, Timothy, as his protege, you have to talk to people who have been entrusted with much, and you have to be real honest with them. The
Yep.
second thing that Russell James points out, and we can drop those books in the chat if you want to. They're just super, super compelling. Some of the best theology of biblical fundraising that I've ever read. But what he points out is that word command those who are rich in this present world, comes from 2 Greek words, para and angelo. Para meaning to come alongside, like a parable that Jesus tells a story alongside a kingdom reality, and angelo meaning angel or messenger. So what he's saying to us as pastors, as those who have been entrusted with the flock, that our job is not necessarily to command the wealthy or instruct the wealthy, rather it's to come alongside them as a
Right.
messenger. And it's
Yep.
so interesting to me that what is being said here in the data is, I want relationship. As the
Mhm.
institutional trust has eroded, this
Right.
next generation is raising their hand saying, I want someone to come alongside me. I
Right.
need someone to walk with me in this. And Kristen, you'll even talk about it here in a minute. You talk about trepidation from a pastor. There's trepidation from a 30-year-old who's just inherited $20 million,
Right.
and now
Yeah.
I've got to steward this really well. There is a little bit of trepidation there. So the first encouragement I would have is, how are you coming alongside your congregation, especially those who've been entrusted with much, in interpersonal relationships? And then second, again, to Russell James's research, how are you coming alongside them outside of those walls? Are
Mhm.
you going to little league games? Are you helping them discover their giving passions outside of the local church? Are you walking with them and their family as they discern how to transition wealth from one generation to the next? The next generation is raising their hand and saying, I want that relationship. I want that trusted partner. And as pastors, again, if we take Paul's instruction to Timothy, it is truly our job to walk alongside them
Right.
in that.
My 2 cents there is that, what kind of gave Paul the thought that he had the authority to say that to Timothy.
Hmm.
And a lot of times I think pastors don't understand the seat of authority in which they sit inside of a local church. God has placed you there for the specific purpose to lead that congregation, to shepherd that congregation. And it's essentially like you believing that you have the right to come alongside the people that God has entrusted into your care to help them grow.
Hmm.
So if you start from any other position other than I have the biblical authority to come alongside, whether it's to do with stewardship, whether it's to do with infidelity, whether it's to do with marriage, you have a position, and a lot of times pastors just won't go and sit in that seat. And to your point, this next generation, they're craving people to come alongside them and instruct them. They're not as proud as the boomers were, where we thought we could work it all out ourselves. The next gen actually want people to come alongside and coach and help. And I think that's a phenomenal opportunity. But as pastors, we've got to believe that we've been put in that seat of authority and then go and shepherd and
Dean,
take people.
it's fascinating. It's a fascinating question and call out because in the broader context, even of Timothy, he says, tell young women this, tell
Yep,
men this, tell young men this.
exactly.
He's separating them out into categories. And now he says, hey, here's the rich in this present world.
Exactly.
And Russell James points out that this is not people who have a lot of oranges, but people who own the orchards,
Yep.
based on Plutos, that Greek word there for wealth. And
Yep.
he is, and he's saying to Timothy, you indeed have the biblical authority and responsibility
Right.
to come alongside. And the great news is, I love when data says the same thing that the Bible's been saying for 2,000 years. Because the data just bears it out that yes, that's what I've always wanted, is to someone
Right.
to walk alongside me in the context of a trusted relationship. So yeah, that would be just my 2 cents there. Thanks, Kristen.
That's great. Awesome. Okay, another thing to mention here. So we started with faith being the foundation for giving, but the way it gets expressed is a little bit different. So within that, I would say that how generosity is expressed, the fact that it's more personal and more hands-on for next gen is a big insight. So what you see on the screen here are statements of how they want to express generosity. And you can see we've highlighted where there's some statistical difference between the next generation and current gen. You'll notice that these are throughout, we've looked at high net worth and just next gen at large. These are high net worth, but for the most part, next gen and current gen are pretty much the same. There was a bigger difference with the high net worth, and we define high net worth in the study as $1 million plus for millennials, just for definition purposes. But know that these themes are still true if they're not high net worth as well. So the first one is working with local groups to make an impact where they live. So there's a pretty decent difference between next gen and current gen here. So 86% are saying that they do want to give to and work with local groups. Current gen is at 72%, which is still high, but it's just that much bigger of a need for next gen. The third one down, applying skills and talents to help charities and churches and ministries are all in that same bucket. There is just a desire to give more than money. And we see this in outside of our data when we look at secondary research as well. Just how can I see all of my resources as valuable? And there's been a longitudinal study on millennials. And one of the things is that millennials see their money, their time, their influence as all having equal value. So money isn't more important than my time or my influence. And I think this is part of what we see here is kind of explaining that. The last thing here at the bottom, these last three, just, I think it applies to charities, doing work, whether it's locally or globally, but why it really stands out is just how they want to give to breakthroughs or startup organizations. There's not as a church or as a ministry, you don't have to have a proven track record the same way that you did with an older generation. There's a desire to get organizations going for millennials, to help them as seed money, or whether it's churches or whatever it might be, just a desire to do that. And it's a pretty big difference versus current gen. So yeah, I love this slide because I think it's important to think about, if you're a church leader, what does it look like to help connect the dots for your own ministry, and how what they can give to. Lucas, any thoughts here?
Yeah, Kristen, one of the things you just said, and you said it so quick, but I got to go back and underline it because it's so good, is that for the next generation, they don't think their money is somehow more important than their skills, abilities, expertise, experience, relationships, whatever it is. So we talk at NCF about kind of this notion of whole life generosity. So for that next gen in your church, look at the delta in some of those, work with local groups to make an impact where I live, or get personally involved, or prefer giving to organizations creating breakthroughs. It's not to say that the next gen is not somehow interested in that. What it is to say is that a millennial wants to sponsor a kid in Africa, but they want to visit that kid too.
Exactly.
A millennial wants to give to the local church, but they also want to bring their business and entrepreneurial leadership to bear within that context. They want to make introductions for you as the stewardship leader, as the executive pastor. That's what the data is showing, that they want that. And so the question that I'm asking myself as I'm engaging with those in my church and kind of walking them on a stewardship and generosity pathway is not just how can I make an ask to support a church that frankly I believe in. Like I said, seventh fastest growing church in the country. Like it's some good kingdom ROI. So I don't have any problem making that financial ask. But what I'm trying to do is help them discover their giving passions, according to Romans 12, their spiritual gifts given to edify the body, their experience and expertise, and how can I engage that, not just with the local church I serve in, but with other organizations, because once again, they're raising their hand and saying, how can I get more engaged, more involved, more of my whole life engaged with God's purposes and God's mission on the earth. So Kristen, is just so good. They don't see their money as somehow more important than these other
Yeah.
things. They want to bring all of those things to bear with a generosity mindset.
And I would just, kind of in a practical sense, how you could take some of this information. There's probably 5 projects in your church today that you could stack rank 1 through 5.
Mm.
And so you pick the most important one, might be the repair,
probably for most of us.
right? And like this next gen, and they're very project minded. Hey, I don't want to just sponsor a kid. I want to go to Africa and I want to get involved in the kid's life. And it's like, so that's a project. I'm going to save up. I'm going to buy an airplane ticket. I'm going to fly to Rwanda or wherever. Projects are really awesome catalysts for getting people involved financially, but also with their talent to be able to, hey, we're going to fix this part of the, life center, or we're going to, like, whatever the project is around the church. And I'm sure there's dozens of them. Pick 5, get the top one, knock them out, and you'll see volunteers and people gather their resources and their talents to go and get those projects finished.
That's great. Awesome. Okay, we're going to move into a new set of insights around what we call the non-monolithic generation. So just like any other generation, there's different distinctions within. And I mentioned this at the beginning around those different segments with influences and preferences. I'm going to kind of bounce through these and give you some definition or descriptions. And the way that I would think about this is kind of what Dean said at the beginning is when you are talking with or thinking about different programs related to millennials, how they come at it will have different preferences and influences. It doesn't mean that there might be anomalies that don't fit the bill here, or not bill, the definition, but this is just what came out of the data where we saw the themes. And so I think it's helpful to know, or if you're having a one-on-one conversation, just kind of what might be driving or motivating each of the different segment. So I mentioned the definition and the wealth origin. What are the characteristics that we see? And this is when we're looking at high net worth or, just those who've been entrusted with much, what makes them a little bit different. So we see with wealth creators, they're a bit more proactive, they're more bold and engaged, entrepreneurial. Inheritors on the flip side are more cautious. They feel more burden and uncertainty. And part of that's due to if there's been multiple generations that have been passing down wealth, the pressure to get it right or feel like you're getting it right just becomes even heavier as the generations pass. And so there tends to be more caution. And then hybrids are kind of a balanced mix of both, where there's still a family element to it, but there's also more entrepreneurial and strategic mindset when they're thinking about what they're going to give to or how they're going to steward. When it comes to risk, you can see the spectrum of risk is also similar to that was right above, which is just more likely to take big risks for both wealth creators and hybrids. So this is where, if there's a new type of organization, a new church that wants to get planted, you're probably going to see wealth creators or hybrids to be the ones that are kind of stepping up first to fund that new church or new ministry that's an offshoot of the church. Whereas your inheritors might be a little bit more cautious. In wanting to see how it ties into their family values. What prompts them to give? This was really interesting as well. When it comes to impact, wealth creators and hybrids are really looking for, they want to see the impact statement. They want to know kind of what the impact that is expected. Wealth creators are more likely to also give when there's an urgent need. So when there's crisis, when there's a humanitarian need, what we saw in the data is that a wealth creator is more likely to be the one to respond right out of the gate. And then inheritors are more likely to respond when they can see a need up close, when they, can see how it aligns to their family values and those interests. And yeah, that's all I had here. Do you have anything, Lucas, or you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I think the one, Kristen, you kind of mentioned this a little earlier. So again, I'm just highlighting things you've said, but the things that we can't measure are an individual story, right? We can't measure the work of the Spirit, right, in their life and in their heart. And so the it's not a caution necessarily, but just a caveat that we don't necessarily treat generations as kind of a monolithic, because the data shows X, this is how we engage. The data is helpful, but it's just data, right? And they're, it's the danger of data empiricism, right? That we just the data tells us what it is, and we just take it at face value. It's the relationships behind these that are so important, but understanding that the data does tell us something. Doesn't tell us all the things, but it does tell us something. So just that quick caveat.
My ad here is that left-hand column. If you're a pastor leading a church and you want to grow your church and you feel like God's called you to really reach your community, you should know every single wealth creator in your church by name. You should have a monthly breakfast. You should pay for it. And you should get to know these wealth creators and pastor them and lead them and disciple them. They are the ones out there taking risks, building businesses. They might be in construction, they might be in software, they might be in business, doesn't matter what they do. They are driven people. And part of your job as a senior minister is to instill in them that part of their calling. And Lucas referenced it, in Romans 12, there is a gift of generosity. And a lot of times the spiritual gift of generosity comes out of this group. Doesn't mean you neglect the other two groups, obviously. You're going to minister to them and kind of disciple them in a bit of a different way. These wealth creators, they're rough and tumble, they're entrepreneurs, they get doors slammed on their faces, they get told no, 25 times a day. They're tough people. And so for you to know who they are, which means you've got to know your giving records, and that can be taboo for some people. They don't want to know who gives what. I was never like that. I was the opposite of that. I wanted to know. Someone put $10,000 in the offering for the first time. I wanted to know that first. It tells me something. They've just gone from attending to, wow, they're really getting committed to this vision. I want to know that person. And so as the lead minister, especially, or an XP if it's a bigger church, get to know the wealth creators, get a monthly meeting, go to breakfast, spend time with them, and the benefits and the payoff will be huge.
Dean, that as a stewardship and generosity pastor, that is so critical, but
Yeah.
it's so hard.
It
Because
is.
you said the word taboo. I'll pronounce it like you did, taboo. But it is because what we think, Dean, what we think is this is about favoritism, and James says not to show favoritism.
Nope.
It's not about favoritism. It's about
No.
discipling someone based
Right.
on skills, gifts, and ability. Your worship leader in your church knows a bunch of musicians,
Yep.
right? And so, and I bought this, Dean, when I was 17 years old, I bought it hook, line, and sinker when Paul says in Philippians 4, I am not looking for a gift.
Yep.
I'm looking for what might be credited to your heavenly account as he's raising funds for his missionary journey. So as you're talking to these high net worth folks in your church, these wealth creators, we say this at NCF all the time. We're not looking for something from you. We're looking for something for you.
Yep.
And this is an opportunity to participate in God's kingdom work in the world and bring peace where there's chaos and joy where there's fear and relationships where there's fracture. And that is a cool invitation. So
Right.
when we're talking to wealth creators in the church, I'm going, man, I got the best invitation. This is going to be great for you. That's my heart posture. I'm not looking for a gift. I'm what might be credited to your heavenly account. But I would acknowledge there's trepidation. It's sometimes
For sure.
it can be a little challenging, but
Yeah.
you're right. It is a calling and responsibility.
But I love what you said. Just because you can give doesn't make you any more important in the kingdom. The inheritors often are wonderful shepherds. They come alongside people. People get sick. People need to be visited in hospital. People go through marriage problems. Like you need that gift as much as you need the generosity gift to have a holistic church that's healthy and viable and growing. And so it's not about, oh, these are favorite people because they have money. Far from that. You're trying to get them to understand that this is their part of their calling. People with a pastoral and a shepherd heart, part of their calling. People with an administration gift, part of it. So on it goes. It's just our role to make sure everyone is elevated and using their spiritual gifts to the grow the kingdom. And wealth creators just happen to have this gift, and God's called them to be generous to the local church.
That's a great segue actually to the next segment, which is about how do we help people on the journey. When we ask the question about, as you think about people who are helping you with charitable giving and generosity, which could be someone like NCF, it could be a church or a ministry or an advisor, anybody in that space for someone, how do you want to be helped? And we look at it in two segments first, which is some people don't want a lot of help. They just want to have a confidential transaction, which is a gift maker, which is great. There's nothing wrong with that. But you're either one or the other, we found in multiple studies that we've done. Then there's journey takers, which are people that want the transaction and they want to be able to make a gift, but then they also want help thinking through discipleship or collaborating with others or, any sort of mentorship, whatever that might be. With NextGen, there's even more journey takers than previous generations. So we've seen a 1/3, 2/3 split in most of our studies. It's hard to know. Gift makers are less likely to take a survey, so there's probably some tilt there anyways. But we had about 70% roughly that were journey takers for NextGen in our study. And so they're looking for help on the journey, going back to Lucas's first point. So what does that look like? There's 4 kind of areas of different ways to help someone on their giving journey. And I'll go ahead and pull this up where you can see the difference. I've highlighted what is, a different number than the current generation. So community and connection is definitely the most important. And I'll talk about what are some actual, what does it mean in the next slide. So we'll get to that in just a second. But the next is educational and discipleship events. So part of that is the event piece, connecting with others, but it's doing it, having a discipleship or a reason for being at the event, not just a social hour. And then the last piece is that mentoring. So you can see a big desire for mentorship and being mentored by either a different generation or someone with different skill sets, but the desire to have someone walking alongside you. I'm going to put a lot of data on the screen here, just so you can screenshot it there. We also have the presentation that you'll be able to get at the end. But this actually shows what are some of those things that they're looking for when it comes to help on the journey. So regular reviews of giving and the impact that it's having. It doesn't necessarily have to be their personal. For an advisor, when they see this, they might be looking at it one-on-one, but actually seeing and hearing stories from the front of the church on what is the impact
Oh,
of our
yeah.
church in the local community is so important. It may, whether you have numbers to support it or it's stories related, they want to see the results of the generosity they've given, whether it's a tithe or it's extra over and above to a certain project. One-on-one meetings where they can connect and have that personal connection, just like Dean was saying. They want to have a relationship and have coffee and a meal and talk about different areas of stewardship that they're either struggling with or want to step into more purpose. And then that events that connect. So at the bottom, you can see educational events, workshops, community engagement that help connect them with like-minded people. But hopefully this is helpful just so you can see a little more detail as to what does help look like on the journey. Lucas or Dean, any thoughts?
I mean, this whole generation is hooked on stories, right? Like through social media. So whether it's TikTok or Insta or whatever, the ability to tell a story and get up in front of the congregation and talk through, not just, hey, I gave this and this happened. It's like, hey, we got together and we raised $50,000 and we dug 50 wells in Uganda, right? And we filmed it, and we used social media, and we used all the tools that the younger generation are using today to kind of preach their gospel of beauty and looks, and like the whole thing that's going on in social media. It's so self-centered, it's so selfish, it's so me orientated. We're speaking about the opposite, about giving and helping others, telling the stories to this gen especially. Absolutely critical.
Yeah, I
Mm.
would just call out a couple of specific things. I mean, just ways that these have shaped in our local church. Those regular impact reviews can be a nice, color-coded PDF, with pretty graphics and things like that, and how many we've baptized and kids that went to camp and that kind of thing. But for us, our lead pastor will regularly tell his generosity story from platform. When
Yep.
he was a young pastor, a friend who's high net worth came alongside him and paid off his student loan debt so that he would not be saddled with that.
Right.
And then he and his wife have learned generosity in their own way and in their own space. And I could share detail about that, but it would probably be oversharing. But he's got his own how it's impacted me, freed me up to be a pastor when someone paid off my student loan debt, and the ways that he and his wife have been generous themselves. In terms of one-on-one meetings, I would just take that and say that doesn't always have to be you.
Hmm.
I've got a dear friend who falls squarely within the hybrid. He's created his own wealth and inherited a fair bit. He was looking for a mentor. That ain't me. It's an 82-year-old wealth creator in our church, and I've connected the two of
There
them,
you go.
and just working together. It doesn't have to be us all the time. So take that weight of
Love that.
responsibility. And then even the events that connect. I mean, you know, there's lead pastors and exec pastors and things on this call. When I took my first lead pastorate in 2013, it was not long, Dean, before I felt so alone,
Yeah.
just so alone. And I needed other pastors around me
Yep.
to walk with me on the journey. And so as you're doing these events that connect, when someone has been entrusted with much, whether they've created it or inherited it or kind of a hybrid of both, they need other people around them to talk about this stuff with.
Right.
So by way of example, we took about 20 givers to a conference called the Celebration of Generosity this year. If you want to know more about that, my email will be at the end of this presentation. You can reach out to me. It's a conference that Generous Giving, one of our partners, puts on. Sometimes it can just be Chipotle, which is what we did a few
Yep.
weeks after that conference. We just got together for dinner just to have those points of connection, especially when it comes to generosity. So that's some ways that it's kind of taken shape in my context.
Hmm. That's great. Awesome. Well, I'm going to shift to the next insight, which is about agency. And I know I'm kind of bouncing around again. The Tithely team was really helpful in saying, hey, I think this would be really good for the group to see. So we're bouncing to a new idea, but it's this idea of agency. And what we see in the data is that the power of agency is really a key ingredient to a thriving, flourishing, generous life. We didn't put agency into the data as a definition or a term for them to respond to, but we see it, if we define it as taking responsibility for decision making, exercising the will that God gave us to make decisions, to step into things, we can see that populated throughout the data, and that's why we put it together as agency. But let me show you, I'm going to unpack a little bit of how we got to that. When we ask the question around for you personally, what are some of the strongest feelings that come with wealth? 83% of our respondents had positive feelings associated with wealth. The majority of those positive feelings were related to responsibility, to furthering God's work in the world. It's about doing something, kind of stepping into that responsibility. If you remember at the beginning, both next gen and current gen see wealth as a responsibility given by God. And so those positive feelings are correlated and associated with that responsibility of stewardship. When we ask on the flip, the negative feelings associated with wealth, about half, which is, 83 plus 50 is more than 100. So you can have both positive and negative feelings. It was mainly about temptation and burden and guilt. And so I think what we've been able to deduce, and there's a little bit more data in a minute, you'll see, is that when people exercise the decision making, when they're stepping into purpose, they're exercising kind of the will that God has given them to be a steward, to actually give, to get those reps in. We see that more positive association. And you'll see in a second where generosity is bringing them closer to their faith and to family when they're exercising that will. We see also when it comes to negative feelings that female inheritors have a more negative feeling. Inheritors without a voice in wealth transfer conversations, when there's not a plan, when there's not someone stepping into that action, we see the negative feelings happening. And so I think overall, and I couldn't pull all the data here, but overall what we see is that when there's more action taking, when there's, even if it's a little bit like stepping into something, whether it's going on a trip or giving, putting action to the words, there's a more positive association. And what it turns into, which was one of our kind of the highlights of the data, was when we asked the question, is generosity bringing you closer to God and to your family? The top two box, so a lot closer, somewhat closer, was 96% was bringing them closer to God when they were generous, when they were giving, exercising that action, and 79% said it was bringing them closer to family. That is just a really encouraging statistic, because we see that in the stories that we hear, but to see in the data was really good. And where I would look at the agency kind of theme and where we pulled it out is when you look just at inheritors so they haven't inherited their wealth, they haven't been given the opportunity to exercise, decision making yet, or they don't have a voice. The closeness to God isn't as strong, and the closeness to their faith or their family isn't as strong. So here you can see we just pulled the top box, so a lot closer, so you could see the difference here. But about half of inheritors would say that they have, generosity is bringing them closer to God, whereas the general cohort of next gen would say 70% would say that it's bringing them closer. So the way to think about this is there's a 20% difference when you actually have the ability to make decisions and act on kind of what you've been given. It has a lot of benefits. Lucas, or Dean?
Yeah, I mean, the biblical truth of generosity in the Bible is there's many kind of tangents and facets to it. In my mind, the underlying revelation of generosity in the Bible is that I'm putting God first. Mm. And when I put God first with my finance, it kind of sets me free of putting God first in all the other areas, because it's probably the hardest thing to put God first in, like giving money away. But once you get that, it frees you. And so, a couple of slides ago, like all these emotions and things that you feel, all they are as a result of putting God first in your finance. And then everything else seems to kind of trickle down from there and come into a, kind of biblical alignment. But it's the hardest one I found, to get people to understand that if you can put God first with your finance, everything else flows from that point. And it just comes through revelation of what the Bible teaches.
Dean, I saw a cartoon once, it's one of those one frame, like Far Side cartoons. And
Mhm.
a guy was getting baptized and he was holding his wallet up above the water. He was going, you know what?
Exactly.
Everything but that.
That's
Uh,
a great one.
yeah, I've heard it said before, and you're saying, that putting God first in your finances, putting God first in your life. But I've heard it said, generosity can be a pathway to intimacy with God.
Big time.
That's what this data is showing us in many ways, is to saying, when I have agency with
Yeah.
the wealth that's been entrusted to me, that can be a pathway of intimacy with God, and intimacy with my family. And if you look at inheritors and females on the data, they're saying, I don't have as much agency, so I'm not necessarily experiencing this in the
Yep.
same way. And so the question is, for us as stewardship leaders, how are we helping families give together? How are we
Yep.
helping next gen and inheritors take a little bit more agency, thus experiencing a little bit more intimacy with God? I could get into some specifics here. We don't have the time, but my email is at the end of this. I'd be happy to chat with you further about that. We don't charge for any of that or whatever. I'd love to chat with you about specific ways to help um, give families agency in their giving.
Hmm. I heard
Amen.
someone said recently, helping people find their Gen 1. Like if they're a Gen 5 on a multi-generational family story, they may not have found kind of their agency and their story as a part of that yet. And so helping them find their Gen 1, where do they want to give? What's that purpose for giving and stewardship is really powerful. All right, with our close here, what I want to land on is just a few nuggets on next gen women. And we know that there's just a huge rise in the influence of women. And that comes from the projected wealth surge. That there'll be by 2030, women are expected to control about 30 trillion in US assets. So a big increase from the current 10 trillion. And there's just a lot of different business ownership, agency and influence happening with all that. And yet what we saw in the data is that compared to the cohort of next gen millennials that were here, we see that next gen women are feeling more in the dark on decision making around, like in relationship, whether it's marriages or multi-generational families, feeling in the dark on those decisions, feeling like less likely to have a voice, feel less excited and more burdened, and less purpose when it comes to stewardship, and feeling less prepared. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to come alongside women, but it's not going to look the way that it has for men. Probably there's something about, this is not changing. I don't think this is true just for next gen women. I think this is something that just has been true generationally. So what does it look like to come alongside women? I know, Lucas, we don't have a ton of time, but if you want to wrap us up on any final thoughts on this and then take us into the end, that would be great.
I don't have any final thoughts on this, but I just shot a note to Brandon here that most studies say that the majority of our nation's wealth is already in the hands of women.
Mm-hmm.
It's like 52%. It's already in the hands of women. So that's not coming. That's here. And so again, incumbent upon us to serve well. Yeah, we wanted to do a little bit of Q&A if you guys are interested in doing that, or if those came in. Brandon, did anything come in terms of questions?
We don't have any open questions right now, but if anybody wants to put some questions in the Q&A, they can during while I want to pose this question to you all. I think sometimes like webinars and conferences and things like that, it's like, what can I take away right now in this moment? I don't know. I want to open up to everybody. Like, what's a simple thing as a church leader who's watching this webinar? What's something that they could take away and apply to their church this week or this Sunday or whatever that might be? Like if you were on this webinar looking at this data, what would you walk away with as something that I need to change right now at my church, or implement right now at my church?
Thanks, Brandon. I love that question. It's that'll preach, man. Just action item. So, as you're putting those in the chat, that QR code there on the screen will give you access to the full research report. So go ahead and scan that QR code. We'll leave that up there for a minute. Here in a second, we'll put my email on the screen. Brandon's already shared that in the chat. If you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to have further conversation with you. But the other just kind of opportunity that we have is something called Asset Giving University. It really is designed for ministry leaders and folks that do development within the context of not-for-profit organizations, especially faith-based not-for-profit. And it really helps people talk about, think about, and engage with those who've been entrusted with wealth, specifically around non-cash gifts. So the interesting part about NCF is what we recognized a number of years ago is that 75% of what the giving we do is in cash, but 90% of what we own is not cash. So
Right.
the idea is, can we unlock non-cash assets like closely held business interest, appreciated stock, commercial property, whatever, and deploy those resources for kingdom work? So Asset Giving University is really a program, and it's a cohort that James, we'll throw that back up on the screen, that QR code. But it's a cohort that lasts over the course of a year, where you get some education from some folks who have done this a little bit, and then not just a little bit, a fair bit, and also in the context of a cohort with other ministry leaders. So if you're interested in that, I would strongly recommend it. It's something that one of our local offices developed. So there's the QR code. I don't want to go through this stuff too quickly here, and then my info up there on the screen, as well as Asset Giving University. And if you have questions about the research, questions about, thanks, James, he's got it. Questions about the research, questions about what we shared, questions about Asset Giving University, I'd be happy to answer them, or if I can't, track that down.
Perfect. James did ask a question, and I'm not even sure if there is something out there like this. I mean, Dean, you might know. But he asked, we have some young adults that have gotten saved recently and are in between school and getting their first job, really beginning to grow in their faith. Is there a small group curriculum you'd recommend for our young people to go through together
Yep.
that regards this area of generosity?
Financial Peace University.
Amen.
Just head on over to Dave Ramsey. We're good friends with the Ramsey Group. We know those guys, partnered on a lot of things. This kind of leads into my final kind of thought is like, you have to build a culture of generosity in your church. It doesn't come from nowhere. It comes because you as a leader have a revelation about it, and you are willing to go and teach it and take your church on this journey biblically into generosity, whether they be, teenagers who are just starting out and got their part-time job. You want to teach them to be able to tithe and give, all the way through to these baby boomers that have got all this wealth that's going to trickle down. You've got to build a culture, and it comes with biblical instruction, obviously practical outcomes, projects for people to be involved in, and ongoing, and then all the things we talked about, the stories, the testimonies, all the things. It's a culture. It's not a one-off thing. It's not like, oh, we need money for X, we better take an offering. No, you want to have those entrepreneurs already excited about the project. So you just go to them and say, hey, we're raising 100. Are you guys good for 50? We'll get 50 off the rest of the congregation. But they're like, sure, but where do I sign? It's like, I need 5,000 from you and 2,000 from you and 1,000 from you. They will do it. Okay. But it's a culture you got to build.
I would, just to build on that, as I'm pulling up the QR code again, there's an organization that Lucas mentioned at the beginning, Generous Giving, who is a fantastic partner of ours. If you haven't heard of them, they do these journeys of generosity, and they pull together, it could be couples based or individuals. It's great for young people, and it's a 24-hour event where you talk about generosity, and it's a really casual, awesome opportunity. So you can take a look at it at generousgiving.org or com. I'm not sure, but that's a great organization, and lots of resources there as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know it's a lot came at you today in terms of resources for those who are kind of listening, and organizations and different things. And some of it probably sunk in, some of it probably didn't. But again, I'm here to help. And I'm helping do this in my own church context, a large church, like I said, here in the Phoenix area. But as you are considering creating a culture of generosity in your church and engaging with wealth creators and hybrids and inheritors, and helping people kind of pursue generosity in their own life and create a culture of generosity in your church, reach out to me. I would love to share all the ways that I've failed miserably, and to help you avoid those in your church context as well. Dean and Brandon, thank y'all.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys. Enjoyed it.
appreciate it.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks everyone for attending. Thanks so much for your time today. Hope you guys walked away with something practical, and we'll see you next time.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.